Hello, good afternoon, and welcome everybody to this One City webinar that is being run as part of the Festival of Nature. The webinar today is on accelerating Bristol's action on nature recovery. My name is Jude Langdon, and I am head of the City Office for Bristol One City. You're very, very welcome here today. Just a couple of words from me about Bristol One City. I'm conscious not everyone's familiar with that. The Bristol One City approach is about driving purposeful collaboration to make Bristol fairer, healthier, and more sustainable. We work across sectors, across organisations. We work with informal associations and with citizens to meet the complex challenges that we know can only be tackled in Bristol through working together. If you haven't already seen our One City Planet, please do go and take a look. But relevant for today, one of our 4 central missions is all about working together to create a city where everyone is empowered to act on climate and nature recovery. I'm just going to, if you haven't seen it yet, there you are. That's a postcard. Do try and get one of those in your hand if you don't have one already. It's really important to us in One City that we are transparent in everything we do. We want to be inspiring. We want to be a social movement that's open to everyone. So in that spirit, this webinar today is now one of a regular series of webinars in which we are sharing more about what is happening and inviting more people to become involved in delivering the missions for the city. So before I hand over to our chair for today, I just need to tell you a couple of pieces of housekeeping. So we will be recording today's session and we will share it later on the One City YouTube channel. Do go and take a look. There's a bit of a library developing now of webinars that have happened already, and there'll be more added to that. So the other webinars in the series. Also importantly, the chat function today is enabled, so please do feel free to use that to engage with the speakers as we go along. So I will now pass you over to our chair for today's webinar, the force of nature, forgive the pun, that is Savita Willmott. Savita is CEO of the Natural History Consortium and also co-chair of the One City Environment Board. So Savita, it's over to you.
Great, fantastic. Welcome, everyone. And a big thank you to Jude and Jess and everyone at the City Office for hosting this webinar on nature's recovery as part of our annual Festival of Nature. We're on day 6. It runs until Sunday. Do join us for other events if you can. So as Jude said, I run a charity called the Natural History Consortium, which is a collaboration of 13 organizations who have been working together for 23 years. We started in 2003. And over that time, our consortium partners have been working as a bit of an R&D lab for finding new ways of connecting people and nature. And the Festival of Nature is one of our well-known programs. So our mission is really finding the ways that residents, businesses, any of our audiences can play their part in nature's recovery. As Jude said, I co-chair the Environment Board for the city with Councillor Abby Finch. And we're thinking a lot about these missions, and particularly this mission. And I'm going to just read it again. I know Jude said it. I'm going to read it again. The One City mission to create a climate resilient city where everyone is empowered to act on climate and nature recovery. Now, I think words matter. And I've invited 4 of our 13 consortium members to join me on the stage today. I've given them each a challenge to pick out one of those key words from that city mission and help us think a little bit more deeply about it. So our 4 speakers, and I've invited them to be provocateurs and give us something to really think about, are going to dive into the words everyone, empowered, act, and nature. I hope that you will also share your thoughts. As Jude says, the chat is open, the Q&A is open. Great if we can separate those 2 things so that I don't miss any of your questions. So we're going to hear from our 4 speakers in turn and then pick up some of your questions, comments, and thoughts. And I promise we will finish on time at 2 and let you get back to the rest of your day. So to kick us off, I'm going to invite Simon Lawrence to the virtual stage. Simon is Bristol Director for the National Trust, and I've given Simon the challenge of talking about the word everyone in the city mission. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Savita, and good afternoon to everybody. So my provocation around the word everyone is really to ask the question of who is nature for? And we like to tell ourselves that nature is for everyone. But if we look honestly at who shows up, who feels welcome, and who gets to build a lifelong relationship with green spaces and with nature, a different picture emerges. So firstly, who is currently underrepresented or underserved in this space? And I'm going to just talk through 4 areas, really. Firstly, young people, particularly those from low-income households, whose access is often shaped by transport costs, by time poverty, and the simple fact that many urban green spaces don't feel designed with them in mind. People with disabilities, physical, non-physical, visual, non-visual. Now, of course, physical access is only one barrier. Sensory overload, lack of rest places, social stigma are all equally powerful deterrents to get into nature. Culturally diverse communities who consistently report lower feelings of safety, of belonging, and cultural relevance in green spaces, and who may have different traditions of outdoor life that aren't reflected in what may be considered as the norms of green space culture. And lastly, older adults, especially those living alone, who may face mobility challenges or fear of antisocial behaviour. Now, these groups aren't hard to reach per se, but if we consider or we imagine nature through a traditional or narrow lens, they are easy to overlook. So next, what do we know about participation and connection with nature? And there's enormous amount of research in this area, and research from across the UK paints a consistent picture. We know that connection to nature is not evenly distributed. People with higher incomes, more free time, more cultural familiarity with outdoor recreation all report stronger emotional bonds with nature. We know that proximity alone doesn't guarantee participation. And many underserved communities live near parks, but don't feel that those spaces are necessarily for them. We know that safety, representation, and cultural relevance matter as much as physical access. And research tells us that early experiences shape lifetime habits. And children who don't get regular positive encounters with nature are far less likely to seek it out as an adult. And lastly, we know that social connection amplifies nature connection. People are more likely to visit green spaces when they feel part of a community that uses and values them. So what changes when we take a more inclusive citywide view of who nature is for? This happens when we stop imagining nature as a retreat for the already converted and start imagining it as a civic infrastructure, the same and as essential as housing, as transport, as health, as education. When we do this, everything shifts. We stop thinking, responding, and designing for the everyday average person, and we start addressing access to nature for the people who aren't there yet. We move from stewardship to belonging, from protecting nature from people to inviting people into a relationship with nature. And we recognize that nature is not neutral. It carries cultural assumptions about behaviors, aesthetics, and appropriate use. And we start asking ourselves different or even difficult questions. Who feels watched? Who feels safe? Who feels unsafe? Who feels out of place? Who feels belonging? Who never even considered coming into a nature or a green space? And we shift from isolated sites to connected ecosystems of access, where parks, waterways, community gardens, domestic gardens, school grounds, and street trees form a network of everyday nature that connect what may be perceived as the city spaces into traditional countryside, places like Lee Woods, Fields, the parklands at Shire Hampton, Frenchay Moor, the Phelan Ridge, these places that exist on the periphery of the city. So in sum, a citywide view forces us to confront the truth. Nature is only for everyone when we make it so, intentionally, structurally, and inclusively, and with the people who have been or continue to feel excluded at the centre of this work. So thanks. I'll pass this back over to you, Savita.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon. And you've come bang in on 5 minutes, which is very professional. I didn't have to get the blackbird singing at you to tell you we're out of time. Really appreciate your thoughts and really hoping to hear from some of you in the chat or in the Q&A to hear how you agree or disagree with Simon, how this might resonate or differ with your organizational or individual experience. And I think we have some people joining us from outside of Bristol as well. So we'd love to hear stories, experience, research, or practice from your cities. Please say hello in the chat. So a reminder of our One City mission as we work through our words of creating a climate resilient city where everyone is empowered to act on climate and nature recovery. So we've heard about the word everyone. And the next word we're going to look at is empowered. So we've invited Hannah Windross, who is Director of Public Engagement at Bristol Zoological Society. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. I hope you can hear me all right. And just thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here talking about this subject. So Savita gave me the word empowered, which she gave me a little note on. It's feeling confident and able to engage with nature. That's how it was sort of described in the pre-brief. And I think there's many things that make people feel confident and able to engage with nature that make us feel empowered. And Simon talked about those, whether it's travel or whether it's accessibility in terms of the infrastructure or making sure it's affordable, obviously, those kind of things. I want to just, for the sake of provocation, just focus on two things that I think make a huge difference to whether people feel empowered and confident and able to engage with nature. And the first one I want to talk about is just get them young. So we often quote David Attenborough and all these kind of things. But there's one quote he had, which is if children don't grow up knowing about nature and appreciating it, they don't understand it. And if they don't understand it, they won't protect it. And if they don't protect it, who will? Children have to feel like nature is part of their lives. We need to ideally, that's what the zoo's about. We're trying to create nature lovers and conservationists when people are young. And our sense of self is very much established when we're young. It does change, obviously, as we get older. My sense of self changed when I became a mum. Our identity isn't fixed. No one's identity is fixed. But a lot of those pivotal moments of how we form and sort of define our identity happen when we are children and when we are teenagers. I camp in nature because I did it as a kid. We all do the things we did as a kid. You keep doing those things. So children have to feel confident and able to share. At the last 4 years at Bristol Zoo, we've been working really hard on this, and I don't think there's a silver bullet. You just throw everything at it. So we have done all different kinds of initiatives. We have access to nature, which just allows children on Pupil Premium to come in for free. It's a fund that you can apply to. We've got Holiday Access Fund, which allows, again, in the summer holidays. We've got work experience that's only for Global Majority. We have a youth volunteering scheme, which is for children that face barriers to accessing nature. We've got a new program for NEETs that we've just started. So there's lots of things, but it's just that sort of focus on youth. What do we do to get people in nature young? So that's the first thing that I think we could all do to help people feel truly empowered. The second one I want to touch on is trying to place, and again, I think Simon touched upon it, there's sort of reoccurring themes, trying to place nature within a context that the audience already knows and understands. So lots of us grew up seeing nature as other, right? It's a nature reserve you go to. It is it's a beach, it's mountains, and these places are unfamiliar. If you grow up in an urban environment, you don't know them. So we have to create nature as in that one city approach in a place that people feel comfortable with and articulate it like that, market it like that. I sometimes think we find it quite hard to, because instinctively when you talk about wildlife and nature, you just immediately picture, I do, a forest or something. You don't picture the city. So our language is very much nature is other, right? It's out there. It's not what it actually could be, which is the street where you walk to your friend's house. It could be literally the road that you walk down. It could be in the shopping centre. It could be outside the Lidl. It could be near a cinema. It can be in all these places. It can be in Millennium Square. This week, it's Festival of Nature is bringing it to Millennium Square. So I think it's something really to think about. And I think that's why that David Attenborough, I mean, obviously we all grow up knowing, you know, Blue Planet and things like that, but the creation of Wild London, or where I remember the opening scene of that, it showed a weed growing in Piccadilly Circus, or Secret Gardens. These programs suddenly brought nature in our space, and that was so important. I think one of the other things Savita asked is, what do culture and visitor attractions, you know, we are all visitor attractions here, do, as well as conservation charities, I should say, we're both. I think we have to acknowledge, we have to make ourselves accessible for children. It's number one. We've got to be accessible for children and for teenagers and for young people. We've got to start, and we've got to do that. And we've got to accept then that nature can be anything. It can be great if you picnic in a meadow or if you go to a local park, but it could also be a planter on the street. And when we talk about nature and when we market it and we put it in our comms, we have to be really clear that nature is not other. Nature is your home and your house and your friends and the people around you. And if we can do that effectively with children, I think that is just a critical way that we can empower people. So I will stop there, Savita. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Thanks so much, Hannah. Right in on 5 minutes as well. You're all amazing. And thank you especially for touching on the role of cultural and visitor attractions. I can see in the list of people with us today, we have some other cultural institutions and artists across Bristol as well. So we'd love to hear your perspective on this and how you sit alongside many of the nature and conservation organisations. So continuing through the One City mission of creating a climate resilient city where everyone is empowered to act on climate and nature recovery, we're going to come to our third word, which is ACT, and hand the virtual stage over to Liam McNally, who is Chief Executive of Avon Wildlife Trust. Over to you, Em.
Hi, thanks for having me to this panel today. Thanks for the intro, Savita. So yeah, I'm Leah. I'm the Chief Executive of Avon Wildlife Trust. Joined a year ago, just over, from London Wildlife Trust. So I've worked in the Wildlife Trust for pretty much most of my career. For those of you who don't know Avon Wildlife Trust, we're one of 46 wildlife trusts across the UK, and collectively we have about just under 1 million members. Avon Wildlife Trust was set up in 1981, and originally it started off as a very sort of urban focused wildlife trust. And I think that's something quite special. We were actually the first urban wildlife trust, and our aim has always been about involving people in nature's recovery. So we did a piece of work last year to refresh our 10-year strategy, and we've settled upon 3 new strategic goals, and I'll tell you what they are. They are mobilise, transform and influence, and these are the 3 ways that we as a charity are going to achieve nature's recovery. So mobilise, goal 1, is super important, and that relates to my piece today to talk about ACT, the word ACT. How do we get people to act for nature's recovery? So for mobilise, what do we mean by that as a charity? We mean that we will develop a movement where everyone feels inspired to take meaningful action for nature in their own neighbourhoods. And as a grassroots organisation, we were set up by local people in Bristol back in the day who wanted to do something about nature and wanted to protect nature in the city. And over the years, we've expanded that out, and we work now across South Gloucestershire, Bristol, Bath and North East Somerset, and North Somerset. So we aren't just urban, we're rural and we're coastal as well. So we have such a brilliant variety of habitats as well in this region. Very, very lucky. But back to how we get people to act. As one of our speakers said, there's the classic Attenborough quote, if people don't care about something, they're not going to do anything about it. We know that, but I also think that if we want people to act, we need to diversify our sector. We need to be having role models where people can see people like themselves acting for nature. And some of the work that I led at my previous organisation at London Wildlife Trust did exactly that. I can give some examples of that, where we can bring together art with nature, where we can bring together well-being with nature. That attracts a wider range of people, and with great benefits. One of the big problems with our sector is there is this expectation that people should volunteer to get practical experience. And, you know, acting as a volunteer is brilliant. We love volunteers, but there are huge barriers for a lot of people, particularly young people, to be able to volunteer. So what I did was to create a paid traineeship program for young people, and 84 young people went through that program, and 75% went on to get a job in the sector. So that practical experience of acting for nature was absolutely crucial in enabling a wider variety of people to get a job within our sector. So I think it is very, very important that everybody is able to act for nature, and how we allow that to happen can't just be the traditional ways of come and volunteer with us, give up your time for free. We need to create more opportunities for people that enable them to do that. And some of the work at Avon Wildlife Trust that I'm really proud of is our Wildlife Champions programme. So our aim is to have a wildlife champion in every postcode by 2030. And we are about 3/4 of the way there, I would say. We recruit people, we train people, and we give them the training and the help they need to act for nature in their own communities, in their own neighbourhoods. So we're not coming in, parachuting in, telling them what to do. They're telling us, we're listening, and then we're supporting and we're enabling and we're training, and we're doing that follow-up. So that model has worked really well to enable people to act for nature. So I really think that if we want people to act, we need to support them, and also that it isn't all just down to people, it is also down to system change. So I'd really like us to think about how we can change systems to enable more people to act for nature. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Thank you much. Thank you so much, Thea. Great to see your comments and a couple of questions coming in as well. We've touched a little bit there on volunteering, the role and opportunities for young people. I know we have some really diverse organizations here in the room. It'd be great to hear about your views on volunteering and systemic challenges as well. So we're coming to our fourth and final word within our One City mission of creating a climate resilient city where everyone is empowered to act on climate and nature. We're all going to have that memorized by the end of the hour. And our fourth word is nature that we're going to pick up. So we've asked Hannah Milbank, who's head of communications for WWT, the wetland charity, to come and consider the word nature.
Thank you, Savita. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. It's really good to have this opportunity to share WWT's thinking and ambitions with the people of Bristol, particularly such a group of engaged people like yourselves. So as Savita said, I have been given the word nature. So a simple word, perhaps, particularly to this group, but one that will mean very different things to different people. So I'm going to explore that a little bit this afternoon. So I'm sure that those of you who have lived in Bristol for some time, that when you think about WWT, you think about Slimbridge. Our wetland reserve in neighbouring Gloucestershire, just up the M5, opened its doors to the public 80 years ago this year. So whether you've visited Slimbridge during your childhood or more recently, it is a spectacular haven for getting up close to wetlands and wetlands wildlife. But wetlands are much more than nature reserves in rural areas that sit far beyond and away from our cities. And as a charity, WWT are on a mission to restore wetlands and unlock their superpowers. And we're particularly ambitious about creating more blue spaces in our urban areas, including Bristol. So wetlands are, of course, a part of nature, and they have superpowers that can support both elements in the One City mission. They have hidden and often unknown powers to not only reduce the impacts of a changing climate, but also to help us slow down the rate in which our climate is changing. They can also help nature recover and bounce back, and they can bounce back fast. So for those of you who attended the Festival of Nature's Millennium Square weekend this time last year, you may have come across our pop-up wetland that showed firsthand the impact that bringing water into our concrete urban spaces can bring. So within half an hour of us arriving with water and wetland plants in tow, we had damselflies and dragonflies buzzing around us, ready to set up camp in their new home. Sadly, Millennium Square's wetland was temporary just for the weekend, but what it did do is it accelerated our ambitions and our conversations to breathe life back into our cities through the addition of more blue spaces. So you'll all know Bristol has a huge and rich heritage and natural connection to water. There's 100 miles of waterways throughout the city and a harbour side at the heart of Bristol. Rivers meander through our neighbourhoods, many of them underground, but they're very much there. Of course, on our doorstep as well as the Severn Estuary, which is a Ramsar designated site and the second biggest tidal estuary in the world. We live in a blue city as much as a green one, but while there has been tremendous efforts across the city to improve urban green spaces in recent years and improve the access that everybody has to them, the focus on green has sometimes been to the detriment of blue. Wetlands are home to 40% of life on Earth. Just 10 minutes spent in a wetland could improve someone's mood. And while providing a home to wildlife, they also help to buffer us from floods, they clean our water, and they protect us from droughts. This conversation today is actually really timely. Today is probably WWT's second favourite day, the first one being World Wetlands Day, which is in February. But today marks the second World Saltmarsh Day. And I will just make a very quick plug. For those of you that haven't spotted it already, please spend 2 minutes having a look at our new Marsh Life music video that was released this morning in honour of salt marsh habitats. But how many people know that salt marsh stores carbon up to 40 times faster than forests? Or that every winter the Severn Estuary's salt marshes and mudflats host more than 74,000 migratory birds, many of them with international importance? So in Bristol, as I said, blue spaces are everywhere, in particular our rivers. We've got the Malago in Bedminster, the Trim, the Froome running from the north of Bristol and reappearing in Castle Park. We've got brooks like Colleter's and Hallfield, and of course we've got the River Avon itself. And these rivers and blue spaces in Bristol have inspired many stories over the generations, and they have become part of the fabric of the communities that they run through. And there's a vibrant community of people working to restore polluted streams, resurface lost brooks, and tell the story of these wonderful pockets of nature and their value to the communities around them. These groups obviously interact and overlap with a network of parks groups and forums and the huge diversity of local groups across the city that care about the local environment. But the West of England State of Nature report, which was published on Monday, highlights how the health of Bristol's rivers remains poor, while wetland bird species across the regions continues to decline. Meanwhile, whilst it's really positive to see that the latest official access to nature statistics show an increase in the number of people living within 15 minutes of nature across the country, it now stands at about 80%. If you actually dig in deeper to the statistics, it shows that the number of households within a 15-minute walk of blue spaces specifically remains markedly lower at just over a third of households. So that means 2/3 of the population are not receiving any of the well-being or the environmental benefits of wetlands in their communities. In many cases, there's often a lack of data, so the State of Nature report also contained valuable information and insights on people's access to green spaces and things like tree equity scores across the region. But again, it highlights the need for parallel data on blue spaces to understand the situation there. Wetlands, which are essentially anywhere where land meets water, are superpowered solutions to many of the issues that we're facing as a society, but they can also be overlooked in our discussion on nature. To be clear, this is not about pitting green against blue, but it is about recognising the power of our blue spaces, particularly in Bristol, and having the data and policies available and ready to monitor and restore them for the benefit of both people and for wildlife. And that's why I think we need to start seeing the city through both blue and a green lens. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much, Hannah, Leah, and Simon, for getting the conversation started, helping us really think about those words that were chosen to be in the One City mission. So we're going to open the floor up. We're in a kind of webinar setting rather than a Zoom call, so we can't see everyone's fantastic faces, but we can see your kind of thoughts and questions coming through. Some great comments in the chat from Kate, who's joining us from the Centre for Sustainable Energy, from Emily, who ran a great Festival of Nature event earlier this week. Claire, who's just added some thoughts from the watershed as well. But I want to jump over to a couple of the questions that have come into the chat, which feel really relevant to the One City approach of partnership, which is obviously what NHC is all about as well. And a question from Holly that I'd love to pick up, who asks about how universities in the city could better support nature and partner organisations. Obviously, we've got our two great universities, Bristol and UWE. Locally, we also got Bath and Bath Spa and many just up the road. So any takers on that? How can we work more with our research community, students and staff at universities? I'll let my panel volunteer themselves if they've got a thought on that.
I don't mind just chipping in a little bit. We've got lots of opportunities for surveying and monitoring. We've got 25 nature reserves across our region, and again, that sort of practical in the field experience of surveying and monitoring is something that we do regularly. We use GIS for our monitoring system. So we'd love to collaborate with the universities more, the local ones in particular. We do get approached by ones that aren't so local actually about working on academic research projects. And we've just acquired a new dairy farm near to Weston-super-Mare. We've done so much monitoring of the lack of wildlife, I have to say, on site. It's really just clinging on the wildlife at this former dairy farm. And through doing all of this monitoring, we can prove the case that, you know, nature is really at risk on this site. And we would really love to bring nature back and return this former dairy farm back to a more natural state. So I would say surveying and monitoring academic research would be a really great way to collaborate.
Great, fantastic. Hannah.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to come in here and just say, really maybe to do a bit of a shout out for the universities. So we, Bristol Zoological Society, we run all the master's, PhD and courses in partnership with the universities. So the students are on our site, we have a campus there at the zoo every day. And the universities are running masters in conservation leadership. We do that with UWE, with the wildlife conservation degrees, all of those at Bristol. So they are running a number of courses already, which they do in partnership with the zoo, and the students are therefore at the zoo. And as a result of that, they generate a ton of research. So, you know, we have students who are doing exactly as Leah said, who are coming out and doing studies. You know, we've had studies on our gorillas. We have transects of our site to look at the biodiversity at the zoo. It's 130 acres, so there's a lot of biodiversity there. And the students are writing up and developing research propositions and doing that. And I mean, I guess we're quite fortunate at the zoo, but I really do see how much they are investing in there, and their students do exactly that. They do a lot of the research for the zoo on all the biodiversity projects and our conservation projects that we work on. So we have some conservation projects on the Downs, and it's the students that are doing that work with us. So I think there's a lot of good stuff that they do. I'm sure there's always more, obviously, that they can, but I just wanted to flag some great things that I know.
Great, Hannah. Other Hannah.
Yeah, and I guess just to add to this, from our perspective, research is absolutely fundamental for a better understanding. I mentioned in my section a lack of research around specifically blue spaces and more water, and that's something we're really looking into. So understanding the impact and benefits of smaller wetlands, so ponds in people's back gardens, ponds in local parks, the impact of introducing blue spaces into schools or outside hospitals, is something we really need to unpick more. There's a lot of interest. There's a growing interest in wetlands and a growing understanding in a lot of the important places about the fact that wetlands are a really good solution. But more research and more evidence around that will help in terms of unlocking funding, in terms of influencing those decisions at both a local and national level. So we've got quite a big conservation evidence team who does a lot of research in terms of both the environmental and the societal benefits and bringing nature into our urban areas. But I think working closer with the universities, particularly to get that kind of young person's view on it, would be really beneficial.
Yeah, thank you all. And you know, I'd really add to any students or researchers or support staff in the audience. You know, nature is kind of the ultimate multidisciplinary topic. You know, this crosses biological sciences, social sciences, management, health, arts and culture. We have a whole number of researchers right now at the Watershed who are talking about technology and engagement. And I'll pop that link there. It's going on until 5:30 if you want to dip over there and see what those researchers are talking about after. That would be great as well. Did you want to come back in, Hannah?
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing actually, is the economic benefit as well. And I think that's something that we at WWT are starting to look into a lot more, is, you know, if we want to sell this to the people that can make the decisions and make the really big difference for nature, I think understanding the economic benefit is really, really vital as well. So just to add to what you said, Savita.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put a shout out to UWE, actually, University of the West of England. They hosted a brilliant conference led by Dr. Maya Rose Craig of Black to Nature late last year. I was one of the panelists, and it was a conference around race equity in nature. And it was brilliant, and it was a real mix of students, people from the sector. The room was full, and we had some really brilliant conversations as the panel to talk about, you know, how it is possible to get more diverse people involved in nature. There's this assumption that people aren't always interested. They are interested. They do have heritage in different countries that they can bring in terms of their connection to nature, and everyone does have some connection to nature, but the way that perhaps this sector in our country talks and works isn't the right way, really. So we do need to broaden our approaches.
Okay, fantastic. There's a whole range of interesting comments coming through on the chat and on the Q&A. If you've got some answers, it doesn't have to come from our panel. We're a community of city partners. So if you've got some answers that you can share in response to some of the questions, please do, and we can get a bit of a conversation going. I want to pick up a couple of thoughts here about I guess starting out. So we've kind of had a question saying, could our speakers give an example of involving a new group or new audience into nature? A kind of related question saying, you know, what kind of advice would you give to people sort of starting off in the new way? Keen to talk about the kind of audience side first, and then we'll come back to kind of city partners working together. Would any of our panelists like to give any examples? Simon.
Hi, thanks. It's a really great question, I think, because I mentioned in my little provocation that, you know, we all probably sit on the periphery of the city, and we're involved in sort of asset management almost in terms of those bits of countryside that sit outside of the city. So I think one of our real challenges is how do we become more relevant from a one city perspective? And I think the way to do that is through place-based partnerships, where we can use some of our what might be considered to be traditional expertise to work with community groups and to support the concept of nature for everybody in the environment in which they live. So National Trust is on a bit of a journey at the moment in terms of that inflection from being asset-based and inward-looking to being more partnership-focused. If I was to pick up one relationship that's been brilliant for us is with a organisation called Heart of BS13 from Hartcliffe, where we've been able to reach out, work alongside them, understand what they want to generate from their own charity. They're a very strong organisation, community-based already, and it's understanding the strengths of that organisation and how we can work and leverage from those, and then what we as an organisation might be able to contribute to drive relationships forward. And I think a lot of this is work that we've got to push forward, going forward. So one of the slightly larger projects that we're involved in at the moment, and when I say larger, I mean sort of institutional and national, is Nature Towns and Cities, and we're working with Bristol City Council on this, and they're working up their own project with regard to a Nature Together programme. And really that looks at how the Bristol City Council and how the partners within it can develop almost like a one-stop shop of resources available to support community groups who can then engage in their own activism and activity to enable green spaces in their direct communities. So I would say all of us, and others will speak now, I'm sure, we're more interested in now in the relationships and how we can support place-based partnerships and work together to enable this sort of one city concept of nature is for everybody. I'll leave it there, Savita.
Thank you, Simon. Let's hear from you, Leah, and then I'm going to take us onto a slightly different theme that's come up in the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think communications is really important in all of this, and particularly, like I said, people seeing like people like themselves doing that communication. So I can give two really great examples. Louis VI, who's one of our new Wildlife Trust ambassadors. He's a music artist, a zoologist. And if you want to go and have a look at his TED talk, it's fabulous. It's about birdsong and how it's the music that we've forgotten how to hear. So please have a look at that. And I think also I'll give the example of when young people start posting about nature and their connection to it, they can build up an absolutely massive following. So I think there's a lot in terms of communications and moving away from the more traditional way of communicating about nature and handing that over to young people to do that for themselves, to get a wider range of people interested and excited about nature, because they really are. And it really helps to bring people together, like-minded people together who feel like they're on their own and they don't have a connection or a network.
Great, thank you, Leah, and all of the continued chats and questions coming in. I wanted to pick up a slightly different theme. We've talked a lot about communications and engagement and audiences and communities, but we've also had some great questions about how we meet some of our 2030 goals in terms of habitat creation, habitat protection, land management, breeding programs, all of the conservation work that your organizations are doing. So I was hoping that each of you might give a flavor of what feels most important in terms of creating a nature-rich city or climate resilient city, and how city partners can support what you do. There's been talk in the chat about transport, about SUDs, about health, lots of different themes. It'd be great to know some of the projects. Leah, you touched on Ebden Farm. Anything else that people can be aware of and support? Any takers? Any takers?
Yeah, so I can maybe start. I mean, we have a range of projects over the city to do conservation work. So we do conservation work globally, in different countries around the world. You know, we have reforestation projects in Madagascar where we're working with lemurs, but then we have a lot of direct field conservation projects, you know, in Bristol. So I mentioned the Avon Gorge Downs. We've had a presence there and doing conservation work, and going to secure new funding to do that conservation work there. We do lots of work with crayfish, where we are doing breeding and reintroductions into the rivers of the southwest. It's a species that is under threat. We work with silky wave moths. So I'd say there's lots of different habitat projects that we have around the city that people aren't aware of. You know, most people think Bristol Zoo, it's a zoo. They're not aware of the fact that we are a conservation charity with, you know, a big strong team of people doing field conservation. So I think it's nice to be here and just tell people that. But I think in terms of how people can support it, I think it comes down to, I mean, one of the challenges for all of us, I'm sure, is funding. Funding this work is difficult. It's not easy, and the funds are shrinking. I mean, they absolutely are. We see more and more pressures for these kind of grants to do this work. So it's difficult, and we don't want to say it out loud, but I'm sure all of us are thinking money. There is a challenge there to doing that work. And then there's a challenge in terms of capacity. And here you have a real struggle because we depend heavily on volunteers. It's a volunteer-led piece of work. You know, if we look at a lot of the projects that we've got, we're just starting some new work in FOST. As Leah said, you know, people, it's not inclusive. If you're looking for free labour, that's not inclusive. So you have this sort of struggle, right, between your conservation goals and your need to engage and actually genuinely get more people into conservation that can do it, with this sort of financial pressure that sits in between the two. And what I would say is it's the partners for us that make the biggest difference, that come on the long-term journey. So partners, we have a number of partners. So I'm gonna shout Nature Care. Nature Care produce sanitary products for women. They're completely 100% natural. They've been a founder working with us. They sponsor Bearwood, which is part of our habitat, but they also sponsor a lot of conservation projects. And it's long-term funding and it's long-term partnership. So they're in it for the long haul, and they're thinking about how it benefits their employees. They're using their employee engagement. They're using it to actually enhance their brand. They're using it because it aligns with their values. And these kind of partners are rare, but you sort of get them when suddenly you kind of align and go, actually, we're trying to achieve the same things, and this can be mutually beneficial. So I would say, you know, if there is anyone on the call, it's knowing about that kind of partnership and thinking where you can, that I think is one of the big challenges we face when we do those projects. Just wanted to.
Yeah, great. Yeah, there's so much happening across our city with you all and any other partners. Does anyone else want to come in on the kind of habitat creation, land management side?
I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts about the things that WWT have been doing in kind of urban environments in particular. And I think we're not working directly in Bristol on any projects at the moment, but we have done projects outside of the city. So Bridgewater is somewhere where we've done a huge amount of work, and also Richmond and Slough in London. And it's a balance, and I think somebody mentioned SUDS in the chat. We need to change that name because it's just such a horrible phrase. Sustainable urban drainage systems, for those who don't know. And what we are trying to do at WWT is try and ensure that we're creating these blue spaces in a way that's beneficial for kind of multiple benefits. So even SUDS, sustainable urban drainage systems, are currently seen as something which drains away our water, gets rid of it really quickly. But if you make them if you make some tweaks to them and you do it with nature in mind up front, then you can enhance the places where people live and work. And in Bridgewater, we've done a lot of that. We've put a SUD system outside a school, and the school helped to plant those. Apparently it took days and days and days, because funnily enough, primary school kids are quite difficult to herd. But every single one of those children planted a wetland plant in the SUD outside their school, which they then go and jump over, and there's stepping stones and things. Talking about empowerment, those children are the same children that will be teenagers hanging around in that park. So hopefully that involvement up front will help them to kind of value and look after that space in the future. But also we've done things in Bridgewater, for example, where we've introduced blue corridors, so you connect all those different spaces together so that people can start to kind of understand that connection. And introduce things like floating wetlands as well. So not only do floating wetlands bring biodiversity benefits, but they also enhance the places where people live. So it's thinking about the kind of multiple benefits when we're doing this, and also not always thinking about the big landscape scale projects. We do both. We do landscape scale restoration of salt marshes, but then we also recognise that a tiny little drain pipe pond in your garden can actually make a big impact. So
fantastic. We're coming towards we're sort of in the last 10 minutes. So do you have a look? And as I said, if you can answer any of the questions that we might not get to, although we're going to take away all the chat and all of the questions and see if there's ways that we can kind of share answers through the Festival of Nature communications. But don't want to leave people hanging with no answers at all. Simon.
Yeah, I think just on conservation, I think it always works best when you're working with partners. So, working with the Bristol Zoological Society in the Avon Gorge. Avon Gorge is an amazing, unique bit of nature, and there's some species in there that are only found there. We should be really heralding that from a city perspective. So not is silky wave moth, that's one of them. We're doing some species recovery work together in that area. We're taking some of the Bristol white beams from there that only grow there. We're trying to plant them as part of our woodland planting on the Phelan Ridge, where we're trying to connect nature corridors across the whole of the ridge. So there's some amazing stuff going on, but it always works best when we're in partnership. And then if we can take our individual activity and work together on a grander scale, eventually out to what Hannah was saying around a landscape scale. And the benefit of that is who we can involve in that. So we've got a really nice little thing going with the West of England Combined Authorities, just for citizen science, bringing people onto our sites to help survey what we've got. And it just adds capacity to our activity, looking and surveying great crested newts and hazel dormice and what have you. It's really fantastic stuff that if people want to get involved in, we're very open and very happy that we can get more and more people inspired by being part of nature conservation.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to come around to you. One last question for you all, and put some links in the chat as well. But I think, especially for maybe people who aren't as familiar with the work of your organisation, I just wanted to turn back to our panelists and ask you, if there's one big ask from your organisation to city partners, so organizations across the city and individuals as well. What's the big ask from your organization? And if it's okay, I'll go in the same order we did our panel in. So starting with you, Simon, if that's okay.
So, I think the big ask, I'll start with my big organizational ask of me. So National Trust has relaunched a new strategy in the last 18 months. And we've been given specific responsibilities. One of my responsibilities is ending unequal access to nature. And so how am I going to do that? The way I'm going to do that really is engaging externally with community groups. And I need to do more of that into the city. And I need to be having conversations, and I need to be thinking about how we can do place-based partnerships. And so my big ask would be open and receptive to conversations in terms of how we can work together going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And if we're going in order, I'll hand over to you, Hannah, from Bristol Zoological Society.
Yeah, I feel like I should have checked with Simon first, but I'm pretty much going to say the same thing. And he was, hang on, my mic's up there. He was right to come in about the Avon Gorge. That's a massive partnership project. The zoo works on it, but it's just we don't do it alone, right? And our mission is saving wildlife together, but we absolutely can't do that. We need partnerships. Back to Simon's point, we come from this estate-based model. So if you think about the old school, the zoo managed a zoo, right? It managed a bit of land and it had animals. If you want to save wildlife together, what you have to do is then reach out of that and we are not the experts. We are the experts in a zoo, so we need to sort of reach into communities and accept the fact that, so when we set up a work experience program, we didn't try and find the student because we reached out and reached out to those partners. So yeah, my ask was going to be, just think about what one partnership you might form this year that's going to actually help you. And if everybody did that, if we all collectively just formed one new relationship this year that we actually developed and built on, I think we'd all be collectively as a group much more successful. And it sounds like Simon is going to be reaching out to some people soon. So I think there's lots of opportunity there.
Great, fantastic. And over to you, Leah.
Hi, I went on a brilliant trip to Paris with lots of chief executives and chairs from all over the Wildlife Trust movement last September. And I must say, it was really amazing to meet the people in Paris who are leading quite a transformation in terms of what is happening in the city of Paris in terms of nature and biodiversity. It is brilliant. And the difference, I would say, that we really need to take note of is that it's fully integrated. So the biodiversity strategy of Paris is fully integrated with everything. It's integrated with school canteens, the food on children's plates. It's integrated with highways. They are literally ripping up roads, planting them up. Urban spaces are being taken on by people in the community, and they're turning them into urban flower farms. So the strategy is integrated and it's far-reaching. They're stopping pesticide use in cemetery management. Like, everything is integrated. We just don't have that here in Bristol or in the UK. We're doing our nature thing over here. Somebody else is doing their thing over there. And we're even subdividing that into wetlands, trees, Western Forest. There's so many brilliant initiatives happening, but we need to work out a way to make sure everything is working as one rather than separately. So that's what I would say.
Great, fantastic. Hannah.
Yeah, I've got two asks, and I'm also conscious there's 2 minutes, so I'll try and keep them quick. I guess for city partners, it's a fairly obvious one. Think about nature right from the start. And when I talk about nature, I mean everything that nature encompasses. So let's stop talking about green spaces and let's start talking about blue and green spaces. Let's welcome the water in and make space for it to flow. Let's get people connecting with water and blue spaces again. And I guess remind Bristol that we grew up around water and waterways. And then a second ask, is for individuals. So a simple reminder that we all know is small actions add up. I know there's been a few comments about the size of people's gardens in Bristol and the fact that that limits people, but a tiny little mini wetland in your garden, on your balcony, on your windowsill can make a massive amount of difference for wildlife. So those tiny little things make a difference.
Great, fantastic. And before I hand back to the city office, I'm going to take Chair's right to add in one of my own. So in the very short term, please do engage with the last 3 days of Festival of Nature. Beyond that, please do come and connect with us with the Natural History Consortium. We're doing lots of partnership work around finding new ways to connect people and nature with these 4 partners that you've met today, but also the other 9 who come from the region and nationally as well. And also with the One City Environment Board. If you're new to the city office, please do connect with us. We have a new public participation group and lots of other working groups. We'd love your involvement. Handing back to you, Jess, with huge thanks for focusing this webinar on nature.
Thank you so much, Savita, and thank you especially to all of our speakers as well who have joined us today. There we are, let me just sort that out. I'm just going to pop up on all of your screens now some QR codes so that you can stay involved with the final 3 days of the Festival of Nature and to also subscribe to the One City newsletter as well. Let me just find that for you. There we go. All right, brilliant. Thank you all so much for all of your time today. As Savita said, if you've got any further questions, please do stay in touch. You can reach out to both the Festival of Nature and through to One City, and we will make sure you get to the right people. I think the biggest lesson from today is that this is definitely a collaboration and it's time for collective action. And that's how we're going to achieve climate recovery in Bristol. So thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the Festival of Nature.